Uh, yes. So I welcome everybody who's registered and logged in for this webinar on home-based workers. We have two guests here. We have Dr. Marty Chen. Marty is a lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School and an affiliated professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. She is also the co-founder and international coordinator of VIGO. VIGO is a global research policy network that seeks to improve research, statistics, and policies related to the working poor, especially women, and especially in the informal sector. Dr. Marty Chen is a renowned development scholar and has steered VIGO since its inception, turning the research, policy, and action network into one of the world's leading organizations focused on the informal economy. She was awarded the High Civilian Award Padma Shri by the Government of India in April 2011 and the Friends of Bangladesh Liberation War Award by the Government of Bangladesh in December 2012. Good morning and a very welcome to Dr. Marty Chen.
Good morning, Shalini Ben.
I have with me a Ben from Delhi, member of Seva Delhi, member of RUAP. And she's an embellishment worker, a home-based worker, and she will be joining us also in this webinar. She will speak in Hindi. I will translate for her. Every time we ask her a question, I will first ask her a question in Hindi, wait for her to reply in Hindi, and then I will translate both the question and her response in English. Aapka swagat hai. Thank you. Once again, very welcome. And I will begin with Dr. Marty Chen. And I want to ask her very basics at the very beginning. And please explain to us who are the home-based workers and what do they do?
Thank you, Shalini Ben. Home-based workers are those workers who produce goods and services from in or around their own homes. And they produce goods and services in multiple sectors. They're found in pretty much every branch of industry and in countries rich and poor. They stitch garments, they weave textiles, they sew shoe uppers, they roll incense sticks, cigarettes and cigars, they thread flower garlands, they prepare food items, they also are involved in high-tech industries, they assemble electronics, they package pharmaceuticals, they make automobile parts, and they provide services from in and around their homes, laundry, hair cutting, mechanical repairs, clerical and professional work as well.
Okay, thank you, Marty. That was very, very helpful. But how many would they be? Home-based workers? And also, how many women amongst the home-based workers, particularly in the context of India and South Asia?
Thank you. We know the percentage of women workers and total workers that are home-based. It's harder to get absolute numbers, so let me share some percentages with you. We know that they represent a significant share of all workers, especially in Asia and especially for women. In other parts of the world, in Africa, we know that 6% of all workers in South Africa are home-based, and 3% of all workers in Buenos Aires, Argentina, are home-based. That's where we have available data. And we are fortunate to have good data for 4 countries in South Asia due to a collaboration between HomeNet South Asia and the WIGO network I represent. And so we know that home-based workers represent as much as 15% of all workers outside agriculture in India, and 30% in Nepal, and a slightly lower percent in Bangladesh and Pakistan. But among women workers, the percentages are very high. In Nepal, almost half of all women workers are home-based, outside of agriculture. 40% in Pakistan, over 30% in India, and around 12% in Bangladesh.
So yes, a large number of the informal sector workers, including women, are working as home-based workers.
Yes.
But yes, please go ahead. Yes.
And there is an estimate that suggests in India that half of all manufacturing units are home-based. And we know they produce from the homes, 80% of automobile parts are produced in homes in India.
So this is considerable and a very large number. But are they all, I know you mentioned that they work in different sectors, but are they the same type of work arrangements, same type of home-based workers, or are there different types of home-based workers?
Thanks for asking that, because there are two broad categories of home-based workers. There are the self-employed, and then there are the subcontracted. And the self-employed buy their own raw materials and supplies, negotiate their own work orders, and sell their own finished goods, while the subcontracted rely on firms and their intermediaries, their contractors, for work orders, for raw materials, and for the sale of finished goods. But I think it's really important to note that actually the self-employed and the subcontracted share much in common, because even though they are dependent, the subcontracted workers provide the workplace, which is their home. They provide the equipment. They have to buy some of the supplies like needles and machine oil for their sewing machines. And they pay for electricity, and they pay for the transport of coming and going to the contractor to get work orders and returned finished goods. So they share many of the non-wage costs of production.
Thank you for giving us that perspective, Marty Ben. I am going to now ask Sudha Ben, who's here, and I want to ask her about her work. How did she start, and what kind of work she was doing? तो आपसे मैं पूछना चाहती हूँ कि आपने ये काम कब शुरू करा और क्या करती थी आप और क्यों शुरू करा?
2001 में मैं शादी करके दिल्ली आई थी। तो हमें छोटे छोटे 3 बच्चे हैं मेरे, एक बेटा है 2 बेटियां। छोटे थे सब, तो पैसे की बहुत दिक्कत थी। हस्बैंड की बहुत 3000 रुपए 1200 रुपए सैलरी मिलती थी, पैसे की दिक्कत होती थी मुझे। तो मैं गली में अपने निकलने कॉन्ट्रैक्टर काम दे के जाता था। उन लोगों बहनों से पूछे कि हाँ ये तो काम हम भी कर सकते हैं।
क्या काम देके जाता था?
हैंड का, वही मोती सितारे लगाने का,
एम्ब्रॉयडरी, एम्बेलिशमेंट,
पीस का। तो रेट भी अच्छा नहीं था उसका, लेकिन वो दिया मुझे। मतलब 2 रुपया 3 रुपया रेट का था। मुश्किल से बहुत 200-300 रुपये कमा लेते, वही बहुत होता था। बहुत दिक्कत होती थी पैसे की।
और काम मिलता था? काम
बराबर नहीं देता था। कभी 15 दिन तो मिला, तो 2-4 दिन लगातार मिला, नहीं तो महीने महीने गायब हो जाता था, काम नहीं मिलता था।
अब मैं आपकी बात को अंग्रेजी में बोलूंगी। I asked Sudha Ben how and when did she start this work. She said when she came to Delhi after marriage, her children were young, husband did not hold a good job. She really needed money to run the house. So in the neighborhood, when she went around, she saw other women being given the work of embellishment, a particular kind of embellishment, which is embellishing small sitaras and things. So she said that this kind of work was available, and she could see other people in her locality doing that work, and that work was being given by a subcontractor. So she asked the subcontractor if she could get that work. So he started giving it to her. but she used to do this work but was paid very little, 100 rupees sometimes in a month, sometimes not even that. And the work, I asked her if the work was regular, and she said it was very irregular. Sometimes there would be work for a week, 4 or 5 days, and sometimes for months there would not be work. But because she needed this for her family, she continued to work. I'm going to ask her another question. आप ये बताइए कि फिर और वो पैसे आप काम करती थी तो पैसे आपको दे देता था?
जैसे मतलब कभी कभी तो 10-20 रुपए 50 रुपया वो दे दिया, 200-300 रुपया तो लेके भर नहीं गया हम लोग। पैसा भी टाइम से नहीं देता था, बहुत दिक्कत होती थी पैसे के लिए।
और वो कहाँ ये काम किसके लिए करवाता था ये बताता था?
किसी कंपनी जैसे डायरेक्ट जो स्पोर्ट कंपनी होती थी वहां से काम लेता था, लेकिन कंपनी का नहीं हमें पता था, ना कॉन्ट्रैक्टर का पता था ये कहाँ रहता है, तो वहाँ हम जा सके। इतना समर्थ नहीं था कि हम वहां तक जाएं।
So what she's telling me is that she was not paid regularly, even for the work that she was done. She was not paid regularly. It was always delayed payment, and on several occasions, the contractor ran away with some of the money that was due to her, and she could not get it done. I then asked her whether she knew the contractor or who the contractor was working for. And she said that she knew he was working for some export orders for some export agency, but she was not very clear which export order agency it was. She also didn't know where the contractor lived, so she could not even go and ask him for her payment. I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Chen, and I want to ask you if the scenario that our sister here from the slums of Delhi has explained, is it a common kind of issue that home-based workers face, particularly women home-based workers?
Thank you, Sudha-ben, for your story. And yes, the scenario that Sudha-ben has outlined is very common for the subcontracted workers. So the problem of irregular work orders, delayed payments, low piece rates, and lack of knowledge of the value chain to know where their goods are sold, at what price, are very common among the subcontracted workers, making it hard for them to be able to bargain effectively for more regular orders. And sometimes also they're cheated on the raw materials that are supplied. And we find this around the world, and it's a nature of how the supply chain actually works.
Thank you very much for explaining that, Marty. Just want to ask one other question about her place of work. So, जब आप घर से काम करती थी सुधा बहन, तो आप किधर काम करती थी? मतलब कहाँ पे बाहर बैठती थी?
छोटा सा रूम है, उसमें 3 बच्चे, हस्बैंड वाइफ हम लोग भी रहते थे, छोटी सी बालकनी थी, उसमें बैठ के काम करने की दिक्कत होती थी, या पैसा भी नहीं हम लोग पूरे पाते थे, काम बहुत मजबूरी में करना पड़ता था पैसे की वजह से।
और जगह सामान रखने की, रॉ मटेरियल रखने की जगह थी,
बहुत छोटा था, बहुत दिक्कत होती थी।
So I asked Sudha where exactly did she work, and she said I had a small room, a very small room, where I used to stay with my 3 children and my husband and myself, and I often used to, and there was a little balcony attached to my room, and I used to often sit there, but the place was very small and it was very, very difficult to work in those conditions. But what could I do? I really needed that income at that point in my life. So, Marty, then my second question to you is about the place of work that home-based workers are, which is their own home, which also doubles up as their living places, and what kind of problems that poses for a home-based worker.
Again, Sudha-ben, thank you for sharing, because what you have described is very common as well. We have the WeGo network, together with the Home Nets, have done studies of home-based workers, and for the most part they live in single room dwellings, maybe a second room, often with a little portico or balcony attached. But combining living and working in that very limited space is extremely hard. And when the children come home from school, when the husband comes home from work, when neighbors drop by for a cup of tea, the work gets disrupted. Often they have to put away the materials they're working with, sort of dismantle the workspace itself to accommodate the other activities in the home. So the size of the home is a real factor in the productivity of these women. Also the quality, if the home is kacha materials, as we say in India, non-permanent materials, the problem of flooding or leaking, of dampness, all make it hard to store the raw materials and preserve the finished goods from any kind of damage. So the quality and the size of the home is very important. And I should add the location, because if she's working as a home-based worker in a community where other home-based workers are working, there's generally a contractor somewhere in the vicinity nearby. But if she gets relocated to the periphery of the city, as so often happens when slums are relocated, she loses that contact and often the sisterhood of other women in the community. And then the transport costs become crippling. And we did a study in 3 cities in Asia, and we found that transport was 1/3 of the business costs of home-based workers. And we found that of those who had to spend on transport, couldn't just walk to the contractor or to the market, 1/3 operated at a loss. So that the earnings are so slim. If your transport costs go up with being relocated, it becomes a losing proposition for many home-based workers.
Thank you, Marty Ben. I want to go back to one issue that you dwelt on, and she also mentioned, which is that working from home. So the constraint that emerges out of the fact that you're working from home, but also the isolation, the disconnect with the larger community, the disconnect with the larger labor movement. How does that impact? And do you see it in other parts of the world and other sectors of the home-based workers also?
Yes, I think the isolation of working in your own home is a major factor in at least 2 regards, important regards. One is knowledge of the market, of knowing market trends, product design, pricing, where are the good suppliers, do they have quality stock? All of that market knowledge that one needs to be a productive worker is particularly hard for women home-based workers, particularly for those who work from their home because of social norms that dictate that women shouldn't move outside the home, shouldn't deal with strangers. It makes them particularly isolated, but it also isolates them from other workers in their sector. So it makes it harder to actually organize and to find solidarity with other workers, and to be able to learn from other workers how they have dealt with these constraints, and together to bargain for a better deal. So the isolation is a very big factor for those who work from their own homes.
But the other question that I wanted to ask, again related to the fact of isolation, is that have we got evidence to show that the wider economic trends and trends like recession impact home-based workers, or because they are so small and they are working from the confines of the home, are they sort of protected from some of these? If not, then how do they cope with them, and how does it manifest itself in their work and earnings?
You've raised a really important point, Shalini Ben, because most policymakers don't see these workers. They're not visible because they're isolated in their home. And so they don't even stop to think how wider economic trends will impact on the home-based workers, who are, again, 30% of all women workers in India. So we have done a series of studies, one on the impact of the Great Recession on informal workers, not just home-based workers. And of course, the home-based workers who were connected to global supply chains, export manufacturing, they felt the impact of the Great Recession almost as soon as anyone did, because export manufacturing sort of really ground almost to a halt. We did find a difference. Those who were in domestic supply chains could keep going a little bit better than those in the export. We also have found in our study of home-based workers in 3 cities in Asia that inflation has a huge impact on them, that the prices for their supplies increase, but the consumers, if they're in the domestic chains, are often other poor people, and they can't raise their own selling prices. And the piece rates that they get from the global supply chains don't change, maybe even in 20 years, no matter what the fluctuations in the economy. And we also have looked at effects on demand and effects on competition. So when you have an economic recession, like the Great Recession, you find other women or men coming into the home-based worker sector, increasing competition. When you have political unrest in neighboring countries, we see this in Thailand, you have migrant workers who come in and start working in the home-based worker sector. So competition increases. And then, of course, with a widespread recession, demand will also drop. So I think it's very important for us to realize that the poor, when these broader economic trends happen, are not just affected as consumers, they're affected as producers. And we tend to look only at the formal enterprises and the impact of demand and prices and competition on them. But we need to realize at the base of the economic pyramid, those same impacts are happening.
Thank you very much. You've referred to several studies and WeGo's work with home-based workers. I want to ask if there is a common set of demands that has been articulated by the WeGo network for the home-based workers, especially those that are particularly critical for the women home-based workers, and if there is a policy response that WeGo network has put out as a sort of a solution to some of these issues that we have raised.
Thank you. The WeGo network is very committed, as you know, to working with informal workers, home-based workers, and their organizations to develop platforms of demands. And we also are very involved in facilitating delegations of workers to go to global forums. So in advance of the discussion at the International Labor Organization on the formalization of the informal economy, in advance of the Habitat 3 negotiations of the new urban agenda, we convened workshops in different regions of organizations of informal workers, including home-based workers, and have pulled together a platform of demands. And I would divide them for home-based workers into 3, let's say, sets. One is the common demands with all informal workers, which is a demand for legal recognition and identity as workers. It's a demand for social protection coverage, the demand for recognition of their organizations, and they are organizing, a point that I know Sudhaben's example will illustrate. So recognition of their organizations and the right to a seat at the policy table when decisions are being made in cities, in national governments that would affect their work and their lives. They would like a seat at the table. And then when it comes to home-based workers in particular, there's a set of demands around the value chain dynamics, which we've talked about, the piece rates, the irregular orders. So there's all of that negotiating. But there's a set of demands that relate to public policy, particularly urban policies. And these have to do with the policy of the city towards informal settlements and informal housing. Will they get de facto tenure and in situ upgrading, which is the preferred option? Or will they be relocated to the periphery of the city? The second is the provision of basic infrastructure services and transport services, where they work and where the markets are. And zoning becomes an important public policy, because if you have a single-use zoning, which means that she's living in her home, but she wants to work in her home, a single-use zoning dictates that she can only live in her home, she can't work in it. And so there's an effort now to get cities to understand that if you allow residents at least to work in their own residential areas within certain boundaries, not toxic noise or other factors, it's very important, especially if you have such a huge share of your workforce that is home-based. So there are those three sets of policy issues that are very important.
Thank you very much, Marty Ben. I'm going to now ask Sudha Ben here to tell us her story, because I know that her story of organizing, of coming together has many lessons for all of us. आपसे पूछना चाहूंगी कि आपने हमें बताया कि शुरू में आपको कितनी कठिनाइयां हुई, है ना? उसके बाद आपने फिर क्या किया?
फिर हमारे मतलब बहने बहुत दिक्कत जब होने लगी तो हमने परेशान हो गए। कंपनी तो हमने कभी कंपनी में काम नहीं किया। हमारी बहनें ने मेंबरशिप की पर्ची काटने गए।
तो सेवा से लोग आए मेंबरशिप के लिए, हाँ,
तो पर्ची काटने गए तो मैंने पूछा कि वहाँ क्या क्या काम होता है। तो उन लोगों ने बोला कि वहाँ पे कढ़ाई की भी काम होती है, कंप्यूटर भी होता है, मतलब कढ़ाई सिखाया भी जाता है, मतलब आप जाके देखना। तब मैं वहाँ गई, 10 रुपए 5 रुपए तब मेंबरशिप की पर्ची कटती थी, तो गई 5 रुपए मेंबरशिप कटवाई और वहाँ पे एड्रेस पे गई तो हमें एक पीस मिला। एक पीस की मतलब अच्छा बना के लाना।
तो आप काम ढूंढने के लिए वहाँ गए?
काम ढूंढने के लिए गए।
अच्छा, हाँ, तो आपको उन्होंने एक पीस दिया आपका चेक करने के लिए।
हाँ, मतलब आपकी क्वालिटी कैसी है, आप कैसा बनाती हैं, देखेंगे।
तो वहाँ पे क्या होता था? वहाँ पे सेवा के ऑफिस में आप गई तो बहनें क्या कर, आपने देखा बहनें काम कर,
बहुत सारी बहनें थी वहाँ पे काम कर रही थी
और आपके जैसा ही काम कर रही थी।
का ही कर रही थी। मैंने कहा इस चीज को तो हमें भी आता है, एक चीज हम भी कर सकते हैं। तो उन्हें हमें एक पीस दिया, 10 रुपीज का था उस टाइम पे। 10 रुपीज हमें बहुत अच्छा लगा। इतना सारे पीस के 10 रुपए, जब इतना बनाते थे हम 3-4 रुपए पाते थे और उसका 10 रुपए, तो कितना खुश हुए। वहाँ एक पीस दी, तो जब दूसरे दिन ले गए तो 2 पीस दी, मुझे 20 रुपए।
और आपका जो पीस पे जो आपने काम करा था उसका क्वालिटी उन्हें पसंद?
बहुत अच्छा लगा।
So, एक मिनट रुकिए, मैं थोड़ा सा इसको ट्रांसलेट कर देती हूँ। She's told a very interesting story that became very difficult to work as they continued to work in the slum through the subcontractor. So one day the Seva mobilizers came to her community and they wanted her to become members of Seva. So she said, what do people do? So they said, why don't you visit our local office? We also do embroidery. We have a program for embroidery workers and we have other programs for computer training, etc. We also do capacity building for embroidery workers. Why don't you visit our office? So she went to visit the office and there she saw so many sisters working on the embroidery work. When she looked at it, she felt that she could also do it. So she said, why don't you give me some work? So they said, fine, you have to test for quality, and one piece was given to her and she was assured a sum of 10 rupees, which was much more than ever gotten with a subcontractor. So she was delighted even with that one piece and went home and spent a lot of time working on it and did a good job. So when she came back, they really liked the quality of her work, the Seva people. She became a member of Seva and she started asking for more work from them. So then the next day she got 2 pieces and then subsequently more work from Seva. अब ये बताइए, तो फिर आप सेवा के साथ जुड़ी, वहां पे आप लोग, आपको मालूम था किसके लिए काम करते हैं, और आगे का अभी हमें बताइए कि आपने जो वहां से आगे बढ़ी तो फिर कैसे बढ़ी आपकी?
हम लोग तब घर में ले जाके, जब सेंटर से फीस ले जाके काम करते थे। सेवा से जुड़े हमें 8 साल हो गया।
अच्छा,
8 साल से हम काम कर रहे हैं ना। पहले हम घर में ले जाके काम करते थे, 2 साल तक तो घर में किए। 2 साल के बाद जब हमारी क्वालिटी उनको बहुत अच्छा बेस्ट लगने लगा, तो बोली कि आप यही पर काम कर सकते हो। रहा तो बच्चे छोटे थे, तो घर में ले जाके करती थी। थोड़ा थोड़ा मेरा भी क्वालिटी भी अच्छी थी, काम भी बढ़ता गया। तो हमको फिर यूनिट पे यहाँ रख लिए। तब तो 4-5 साल से हम परमानेंट वहीं पे बैठ के।
और रुआब की भी जब संरचना हुई तो उसमें भी आपका हाथ?
रुआब का शुरुआत 2011 में हुआ। उसमें हमारी रुआब से हमारी महिला एक संगठन है, उसमें बहुत सारी महिला, 250 महिला है। अब उस बहनों के साथ हम लोगों ने मतलब शुरुआत किया। इतना बढ़िया काम हम लोग का हुआ, आगे बढ़ा। क्वालिटी भी अच्छी थी, हर चीज का। बाहर से भी काम आता है, हम इंडिया के लिए थोड़ी ना काम करते, बाहर का भी काम करते।
अच्छा, अभी मैं इसको आपकी बात को ट्रांसलेट करूंगी. So once she started getting from work from Seva, she used to, they would give out work and pay her for it. She really liked it and she would take home work. So she would go to the center, collect the sort of order and go home and work. But because of the regular work that she was getting, her skills were also improving and she was doing better work. So initially they asked her to come and work at the center, but she had young children, she couldn't. But after a few years, she decided to go to the center and she started working there. In the meantime, Seva also decided to promote an organization where she has been with Seva for 8 years, and in 2012, 2012, Ruab was created, and she was one of the people who were critical to its creating, one of the home-based workers who sort of took the lead. And basically what Ruab is, it's a unique model for garment production and sourcing, but it's owned and managed by the women themselves. And that is what she's saying, that we created this organization where we work, and we don't just work for local markets, we produce for international markets also. And I'm quoting her, she said very proudly that I feel very good that we are working. So मैं आपसे ये पूछूंगी कि फिर रुआब में जुड़ने से आपको क्या फायदा हुआ?
हमें तो, हम लोग तो जो बहनें हमारे घर में भी जो रह के बाहर नहीं निकल पाती थी, उन बहनों को भी हमने कहा कि जब मैं इतना अच्छा काम करने लगी, तुम लोग घर में क्यों बैठे हो, चलो तुम लोग भी काम करो। उन बहनों को लाई हम। 250 रुआब में इस टाइम है मेंबर, 250। इतने बहने को काम, सारे बहने आई, काम सबको मिलने लगा। विदेश से भी काम आता है, स्पोर्ट कंपनी से भी काम।
तो पहले तो आप घर से बाहर ही नहीं निकलती
थी, डर लगता था। हमें तो कहीं जाने में मेट्रो में भी डर लगता था कि कहाँ जा रही हूँ मैं। लेकिन सेवा में जब जुड़ी तो हमें बाहर भी भेजा गया, मतलब घूमने के लिए भी भेजा जाता था। अहमदाबाद भी गई थी, गुजरात, वहाँ का भी सेवा देखने गई। लेकिन हमें जब अच्छा लगा, वहाँ पे बहनों को भी ले आई, बहनें भी जुड़ के हमारी इतनी खुश हो गई कि मतलब सेवा हम लोग के।
So what Ben here is saying, that once she joined Seva, she was so motivated that she started talking to other embroidery workers in her community and told them, even those who had restrictions on movement, who could not go out, she motivated them to join, said it is so much better, I am so happy. And she was able to facilitate. She in fact became an organizer and organized more and more women. And she said that it gave her so much confidence. And she gave an example. She said, now I go out, I can talk to people. Earlier, I used to feel so scared. I could not even take the metro to travel from one place to another. And now we can go out, talk to people. We have foreign exporters who are giving us orders. So she feels very proud to be a part of this organization. Or and she mentioned to me twice, sorry, I forgot to translate it last time, that it's not a small organization by any chance. There are 250 members from Delhi. And she also mentioned about how she felt empowered by the visits outside Delhi that she has done, especially to Seva Gujarat, where the larger Seva movement started, and that she really valued these exposures that her association with Seva has given her. तो आपका धन्यवाद, आपने इतना अच्छे से हम लोगों को बताया, लेकिन मैं मार्टी बहन से भी पूछना चाहूंगी, sorry, I am going to ask Marty Ben. Marty Ben, so this is a very good example, a very sort of inspiring example of an organization which has created a model like RUAP, but there must be others in other part of the world. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about some other initiatives of organizing, of giving voice, of increasing livelihood opportunities for home-based workers, and from within India.
Yes, thank you. And also, thank you, Sudhaben. Dhanyavad. We are pleased that home-based workers actually are organizing, and we now have 3 regional networks of organizations of home-based workers. The original was in Southeast Asia, started in the Philippines and Thailand, and has expanded to include Cambodia and Indonesia and Laos. We have HomeNet South Asia, which includes 5 or 6 countries in the region and many affiliated organizations. And there's HomeNet Eastern Europe that was started by an organization of home-based workers in Bulgaria. And the WeGo network is trying to build similar networks in Africa and Latin America, where there are fewer home-based workers, but still significant numbers in craft and artisan production and other traditional activities. So I think the movement of home-based workers is alive and well. And perhaps I can give examples at the regional and then maybe the global, regional, and national levels of things that these organizations have been able to achieve. At the global level, way back in 20 years ago, there was a campaign for an ILO convention on home-based work. That's Sewa from India, plus the original HomeNet, and the ILO worked together to bring about. It was a multi-year campaign, and the convention was passed in 1996, Convention 177. And during this year, 2016, to mark the 20th anniversary, there was a celebration in Ahmedabad, hosted by HomeNet South Asia and Sewa and WeGo. There was an event at the International Labor Conference, and there's been a campaign to get ratification. We also, as you know, Shalini Ben, because you were heavily involved, in 2015, HomeNet South Asia and WeGo together hosted the first international conference of home-based workers and their organizations in New Delhi that came out with a platform of demands. And so there have been home-based workers in delegations to multiple international labor conferences and to the preparations for Habitat 3, the preparatory conferences. I know you went to one of them. So they have been seen and heard and felt, if you will, on the global stage, and were instrumental in putting informal livelihoods and the needs of informal workers into Recommendation 204 from the ILO on formalization and the new urban agenda of Habitat 3. There have also been regional efforts with SARC. Sewa and HomeNet South Asia have created a project called Sabha, which is to set up trade facilitation centers and marketing, like perhaps not as developed a model, as Ruab has proved to be, but also supporting the marketing and product development. And then there was a regional conference organized by HomeNet South Asia with HomeNet Southeast Asia in Thailand to bring to the attention of city authorities from 8 countries in the region the findings of a multi-city study done by the HomeNets of how city policies affect home-based workers. And I think, you know, coming out of that Asia City Declaration and the Delhi Declaration, there was much greater recognition of the home as workplace, and the fact that slums and squatter settlements are actually sites of economic activities. And there's a greater push to integrate home-based workers and their livelihood activities into local plans, economic plans. And so I think we've come a long ways. HomeNet Thailand in Thailand has been very instrumental in pushing for a number of pieces of legislation and national programs. And they were part of the civil society movement that pushed for universal healthcare coverage that now extends to all informal workers, including home-based workers. And they sit on some of the boards and implementation committees for the Universal Health Scheme. They also pushed for a Home Workers Protection Act, which entitles home-based workers in Thailand to a minimum wage and some occupational health and safety provisions and all other sort of fundamental labor rights. They also worked with the Ministry of Health to get an occupational health and safety scheme, 3 years for home-based workers and other informal workers. So there's a lot of work happening in Thailand, and also in India, thanks to SEWA and its sister organizations. There's been a lot of work to improve the housing and the basic infrastructure services for home-based workers. The SEWA Mahila Housing Trust, SEWA MHT, is very active in the provision of basic infrastructure services in slums and squatter settlements, but also in sort of advocacy campaigns to change national policy and state level policies relating to housing and rehabilitation and basic infrastructure services. And the SEWA Mahila Housing Trust has pioneered housing finance for home-based workers. And SEWA has recently established a housing finance corporation, the SEWA Gririn Limited, for working poor women, including home-based workers. And then there are a lot of examples at the local level. So I would just say that many more home-based workers need to be organized, but more are organized than I think people understand. And there are these 3 regional networks, and there's a growing international movement of home-based workers that are pushing for the convention to be ratified, pushing for supportive public policies, and pushing for improved terms of trade within supply chains for home-based workers.
Okay, thank you very much, Marty, and that was very helpful. And I just want to mention that this discussion that which you have initiated, and this about the cities and the home-based workers, we would be carrying it to the webinar tomorrow, and where we will have the representative from SEWA Mahila Housing Seva Trust telling us about some of their initiatives and experiences. So yes, so we'll carry some of the learnings from you from today to ask some of the questions and understand the initiatives of Mahila Housing Seva Trust. So I think it has been a very, very interesting discussion, and we have understood so much. You've given us a perspective which is both global, regional, and also local. And our Ben here from SEWA has explained to us from the perspective of the grassroots worker what changes it can bring to her life. Before I wind up, just a couple of questions. There was registration and some questions, and many of them we have answered. I've looked at them. There is there is a little bit that I'd like you to comment on. Two things. One is the global supply chain and home-based workers, and how to bring awareness, how to bring visibility. These are the recurring themes that are a part of the discourse on home-based workers. So would you like to comment or reflect a little bit on it before we wind up this session?
Yes, thank you. We all know that global supply chains is part of the new global economy and how production is being organized around the world. And I know there's a lot of attention paid to the workers in factories in global supply chains, particularly in the garment sector, let's say, and what's happened in Bangladesh with some tragic incidents. And the WeGo network and SEWA have been long committed to pushing the analysis and the advocacy and action focus down the chain to the home-based workers who are subcontracted in these supply chains. And as Diane Elson, a leading feminist economist, observed at one of WeGo's General Assembly, she said, "I cannot imagine a greater distance in terms of power than between the CEO of the lead firm in a value chain and the home worker who's producing goods for that value chain." So wealth and power distance between the CEO and the home worker. And the home workers, as I said, and as we heard from Sudhaben, earn very low piece rates. And yet, they have to cover all these non-wage costs of production, the workplace, the equipment, the electricity, the transport. And if there's fluctuation in demand, the way that firms up the chain deal with it is they just don't provide any work orders to Sudhaben and her sisters in these supply chains, making their earnings and their work very unstable and volatile. And I think we are now engaged in an exercise to figure out what piece rates should actually be for the home-based workers in these supply chains. It has to be above the minimum wage, because the minimum wage assumes the worker is going to a factory where all the costs of production are paid for by the employer. But the home worker is having to pay many of the costs of production. So we need to really think through what a decent piece rate should be for these workers. And we know that in export manufacturing particularly, early studies suggest 40 to 60% of the workforce in these global manufacturing supply chains are informal, right? And most of them are not in factories. They're out in the homes, where they remain really invisible, even to the activists, even to the labor organizers. So that has been a very important niche that, led by SEWA, the Home Nets, and WeGo, have tried to address.
Thank you very much, Marty Ben. And the point that you have raised, that this invisibility in supply chains of the home-based workers, and how they remain invisible to even those for whom they are producing at one end, and at the other end, the labor activists and the labor movement. And so the invisibility of home-based workers, despite their large number, particularly in South Asia, is, I think, one of the issues, and the voicelessness, despite the fact that more and more organizations of home-based workers are evident in this region. So with this, we would like to conclude this webinar, and I'd like to thank Dr. Chen and Sudhaben here, who came and shared with us their views and expertise, and it has been a great learning experience. Thank you very much. Acha, So Ben wants me to tell you and the others that she's also a board member of RUAB and she sits in the meeting and takes decisions. So yes, हमें बहुत गर्व है आपकी जैसी महिलाओं के ऊपर. I've told her that we are feeling.
बात करके बहुत अच्छा लगा.
आपके साथ भी बहुत अच्छा लगा बहन. क्योंकि मेरा इजाजत नहीं है हिंदी बोलने का, हिंदी सुनने का, तो बहुत अच्छा लगा मुझे कि आपके पूरा इतिहास मुझे भी पता लगा. हाँ, तो धन्यवाद. And thank you Shalini Ben for excellent moderating. Yes, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yes,
Thank you.
okay.